My name is Gary Wadding. I was born in United States of America in Pennsylvania, a very small town, a little farming town, and had coal mines. But it was a very poor town because the coal mines were running out of coal. And the farms were small and the big farms were taking over. So it was a very poor situation. So I grew up there as a pretty happy little child, but we didn't have very much, and I didn't know God. We had churches in our town, and we would go to church, but I never knew God. As a child, I would go to the Sunday school, and all I learned was cookies and Kool-Aid and Bible stories, but I never knew God. So as I grew up, we moved from there because my father needed a real job to make a living. And when we moved, we eventually came to Florida, where my father worked at the Kennedy Space Center, working with the rockets. And down there, God began to speak to me through a friend. I didn't know much about God then. I thought everybody's okay because I grew up in a nice little town. We're all okay. Nobody's too bad. But a man asked me, he said, what about God? You need to be saved. And I said, well, from what? I'm a good person. And I said, I try to do the right thing, and I'm sincere. And he told me a story. He said, if you get up at night with a headache, and in the dark, you reach for some pills, and you take the pills, the aspirin, but you made a mistake, and you took poison. You were sincere reaching for aspirin. You thought you're okay, but you're dead, even though you were sincere and a nice person. He said, your choices are very important. You must make the right choice with your eyes open in the light. And I began to think about it, and I began to go to church just for friends, really. Just to ride in the boat with the man from the Sunday school and just to have friends. But one night God really spoke to me in the church. And it stopped being a religion and a tradition, and it became real. Some people might not understand, but I literally saw Jesus. I had a vision, and I saw Jesus. And he said two things to me, not with words, but through his eyes. He said two things. He said he loved me, and I saw more love than I had ever seen in my life. My father was an alcoholic as I grew up, had many things that made for an unhappy parts of childhood. And I saw the love I've been looking for all my life, from the family and then later from girls, trying to find love from girls, but it never lasted. And I saw the love in Jesus, but I also saw pain, more pain than I ever could imagine. And then I understood through his eyes that I was the source of the pain, because I had lived my life without him and said I didn't need him. I was good enough. And that night, the vision ended, and I found myself in church again. And I prayed a prayer that was perhaps not very educational. It wasn't one that the preacher would pray, but I prayed a prayer with tears. I said, I'm sorry, because I was truly sorry that I had lived my life without God and that I had caused him such pain. And I began to understand as I asked him to enter my life. So that's where it all began right then. I was the first Christian in my family. It was not received very well, but I began to grow from that point. It took many years as God began to work with me. But that simple prayer, a sincere prayer, not understanding much, but saying, I'm sorry, and Jesus, please come live in me, forgive me, and work in me. And everything began from that.
And how did your life change after that? What's up?
God began to work in my life so that I was interested in pleasing him, not just my friends. Before, if I made the girls happy, I was happy. And if the men thought I was a real man, then I was happy. But now he began to change my heart so that I wanted to make him happy. So I saw that it was important to do the right thing, not just to be okay and not be too bad. I saw that it was important to please God and that he had a bigger plan for my life than I had. So he began to change my thinking about things like that. And I began to tell others about Jesus. I wasn't very bold with it at first, but eventually my entire family accepted Christ. My brother, then my mother, and many years later, finally my father near the end of his life. But God began to show me that He had saved me, is a term we use. I became a Christian for a reason, not just to go to heaven, but to help other people too. So He began to use me.
And later you got to the army. How did you get involved with the army?
Yes, well, in the United States, we have a situation called the draft, which means the government sends you a letter and says it's your time, it's your turn. And you have two choices. You either go or they come for you. So of course I love my country, and it was in the time of the Vietnam War. And of course I was afraid, but I love my country, so I went, and I was put into the Army, and I wanted to do a good job. And in the Army, of course, I had to learn the things of war. And I eventually did go to Vietnam, but you see, I was already a Christian, and this helped. In the middle of war, it helped to be able to have God inside me when everything is upside down, to know that God has a plan for my life, and He will walk with me through trouble. The Bible says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, fear no evil. He says, I'll be with you. My rod and my staff will comfort you. So God was with me. I was a little bit older when I went to war. I was 23. Many of the boys were 18. There's a great difference between 18 years old and 23, and also being a Christian. So God was with me during war. I was in a very small unit in the middle of nowhere, artillery. I was working not with Americans, but with the Korean infantry, because we were all working together to try to end the problem there. And actually in that war, the Koreans were my friends. The Koreans that I worked with, many were Christians, and not many Americans were. The Koreans were my real friends. And in the middle of the war, in the middle of the combat, I was in charge of, well, they called me, my title was a computer. I was a computer before there were computers. And I would calculate everything. I would talk to the man on the radio, the enemy is here. And he couldn't tell where they were, because the enemy could listen on the radio too, they might hear. I had to know where he was from his secret language, and on the map plot how to make the gun look in the right direction and fire the right angle, and how much powder and how many turns on the fuse. I had to calculate this all up in 1 minute to maybe save his life. So I worked in there, but occasionally I was supposed to go out on a patrol and be in the middle of combat. For 6 months in that unit, every patrol I was supposed to go on was canceled. At first that was good, but then later I began to feel bad. Other people are risking their lives, and I want to. I volunteered for extra patrols. They were canceled. Everything that I tried to do was canceled. Then I left that unit, was put on a command staff, was made a sergeant, put on a command staff, because I did a good job out there. But I always felt that I had not done my job. And even when I came home after the war, that was a big problem in my heart. I didn't do my job, and other people were still over there. And you can say that in your head you should know better, but these matters are not matters of the head, they're matters of the heart. And sometimes the problem in the heart is much harder to solve. A bullet in the arm you can take out. You may even have to cut off the arm. We don't like to think about it, but it might happen. But a bullet in the heart is extremely hard to fix, and to even understand that it's there. So later in my life, I kept having many problems. When I got home, my wife left me very quickly. I had only been married a month before I left. When I came home, she left me. She said, it's not my fault, I'm okay, but she didn't want to be married anymore. And that broke my heart. So now my heart has 2 bullets in it. Everything went so terribly bad. My wife left. I didn't care that she took the car. I had